What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com. Down there, we like magic. Coming to you from the lab with my Pro Tour Amonkhet predictions. As I release this video, it should be either very, very late night, the first night of the Pro Tour after they finish up draft rounds, but before they start standard, or it'll be the morning of the day that they start the standard rounds. So it's about time to release this prediction video before I'm a little bit too late. And after the weekend's over, we will go over the top 8 here and tell you what decks did well at the tournament. But for the time being, I figured I'd go over these decks and tell you what I think is going to win this tournament. But before I get into it, let me just remind you to like the video if you enjoy the video. Thumbs up helps me an awful lot. But without further ado, let me put 8 spots right here and see if we can guess this top 8. Well, first of all, the deck that I not only think will win the day ultimately, but the deck that I also think is going to be the most well represented at the tournament, and I hate to say it, but facts are facts, and objective reality is objective reality. I think Mardu Vehicles will probably win this tournament and have at least 2 other spots in the top 8. Well, right now, Mardu just plays all of the best cards in the format, no way around that. And it has gone through some evolution since Cat Combo got banned. You know, they banned Cat Combo, and the Mardu players are like, oh, we can play more expensive stuff now, so that just gave them access to even better cards. You know, they added Walking Ballista, which really helps out their unlicensed disintegration plan, and they were able to add Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, to the main deck as a 4 of too, to add, you know, some longevity to their plan. They can get a much better board state now because of all of their Gideons. So, and that's not all that they changed. The deck has become much more mid-range since the bannings, but you know, it just still gets to play all the best cards. Some of these people have moved their Chandras in from the main. You'll occasionally see one Nahiri in the main board here. So really, it just increased the ceiling on Mardu when they banned Cat Combo. And by the way, that's not to say that I think that Mardu is the de facto best deck in the format or anything. It's just had the most time to get tuned. It's had the most time to evolve. You know, people that have been playing this deck for 5-6 months at this point know the ins and outs of it like the back of their hands. So this is just the most well-known deck in the format, the most developed deck in the entire format, and I think that that is going to carry it through to a pretty good finish here. Now, in contrast to Mardu, there is a brand new deck ever since Amonkhet came out that's been tearing up MTGO. You know, it's been getting good results at the at the few tournaments we've been able to get listings from so far. But it's been doing pretty well. A lot of people are jacked about it, and that is Blue-Red Control, which I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think could take 2 top 8 slots, but at least one. But for the purposes of this exercise, I'll give it 2 slots. Now, these Blue-Red Control decks are just essentially nearly mono-blue Torrential Gearhold decks that just play like some Magma Sprays and a couple of Sweltering Suns, or maybe even just one Sweltering Suns in the main. Has a couple of other red sideboard board options, but it's mostly, at its core, just a mono-blue, you know, control deck. But this one actually has a few things going for it. First of all these control decks are blue-red based. Occasionally you'll see a Jeskai or a Grixis aggro deck, but the ones that have performed the best have been almost completely mono-blue with just a little bitty splash of red so far in the sort of pre-Pro Tour season. Now, the cool thing about this control deck is that it actually has a fair amount of early game options, especially if you're on the play, against aggro decks. Usually that's sort of the rock, paper, scissors trichotomy, you know. Aggro tends to be good against control, control sucks against aggro. But right now, not only do we get Magma Spray, one of the only reasons to make this deck red, period. You know, we get Magma Spray against small aggro creatures, and very importantly, Scrap Heap Scrounger. But we also get Censor, which is incredible on the play against aggro. They're not playing a 2 or 3 drop against you if you're holding Censor up on the play. So the combination, just sitting behind the wall of Censor and Magma Spray and a couple of other pieces, but those are the 2 big ones, can really, really help Control get a foothold against aggro, which is important against not only the Heart of Kirans and Toolcraft Exemplars of the world, but also some of the other stuff. There's a, you know, a red-white humans deck that is more or less just a mono-white humans deck with like 1 red card in it, you know. And then there's a black-red aggro deck. There's obviously the mono-black zombies deck. So, you know, just having these kind of options early game against these aggro decks is very important for this control deck, but it's got a lot of really good pieces that can help it close the game out too. You know, it's obviously got Torrential Gearhold, which has been a great card since it debuted, but it's also got Pull from Tomorrow, which is becoming a really, really hot card, at least in the preseason, and people are comparing it to like Sphinx's Revelation. I won't go that far, but the card in testing, at least from what I've seen so far, has been very, very impressive and gives control decks a late game way to refill and take control. Which, if you're not counting, is what control decks want to do. Take control, you know. I definitely think this deck has some some weak spots, but it's good enough against all the important decks in the format. You know, it's good against Mardu to an extent. If Mardu gets, you know, Toolcraft into Heart of Kirin, you know, the first couple of turns, Blue-Red Aggro can be in or Blue-Red Control can be in a little bit of trouble, yes, but it's got to get its best start in order to have a truly, you know, 70-30 matchup against Blue-Red Control. So, in other games, Blue-Red is nearly 50-50 with Mardu, from what I can tell here. And against a lot of the other decks in the format, it's fantastic, you know. It goes, you know, way over the top of the all the mid-range decks, you know. And there's quite a few of them that are trying to establish their role in this format. And Blue-Red Control is just very good against nearly all of those mid-range strategies. So long story short, I'm kind of giving it the benefit of the doubt here and giving it 2 slots, even though it could, don't kill me, but it could very easily be 4 Mardu decks in the top 8 and 1 Blue-Red Control, but I'd really like to see it have a decent finish. So that's 5 slots right there. I just got to fill 3 more. And these are where we get into a little bit more speculation, you know. But a deck that a lot of spikes are very worried about, and from what I can tell, from what I've seen people say, in articles and on Twitter and stuff, even pros are a little bit wary of Aetherworks Marvel decks, which I think could take at least 1 slot in this top 8. Now, right now, Marvel hasn't seen a ton of success. We have seen Teamer Marvel decks, we've seen Bant Marvel decks do some work a little bit in the preseason. But they haven't really top 8'd all that much. But despite that, a lot of pros and spikes are saying that it is just the best combo deck, or quote-unquote combo deck in the format. You know, it puts everybody on a 4 to 5 turn clock. You get your Ulamog very early in the game, and they have to be able to answer that, or they more or less die. And this deck is very good at getting a turn 4 or 5 Ulamog. So, you know, everyone said cat combo is gone, and so we don't have to worry about dying on turn 4. Well, you don't have to worry about dying on turn 4, but you do have to worry about facing down Ulamog as early as turn 4. So we actually have a fair amount of game against a lot of decks in the format, but we do have some problems against Control, which could shut the deck out. Especially considering I think that Blue-Red Control and variants of it will be relatively well represented in this tournament as people try to make that deck a thing. And Control decks are usually, let me just say, better in the hands of the pros. We've seen a couple of Pro Tours just recently, actually. Grixis Control won a Pro Tour and never was heard from again. That's just because Control decks are usually just better in the hands of very, very high-level players because of the vast amount of decisions that you have to make. So I think that Blue-Red Control will be very highly represented, and that may shut a deck like Marvel out, but I wouldn't count it out just yet. So many people are taking this deck seriously enough that I think it could be on the list. I also think that there's going to be a green-black based deck somewhere on this list. You know, it could either be the Jund Constrictor deck. Looks pretty good. It's just basically a green-black snake deck that plays Unlicensed Disintegration as its only red card. That deck looks really, really strong. And also Black-Green Delirium has been posting decent results. And even Sultai Delirium is a deck that a lot of people are talking about right now. Even though it hasn't popped up that much, people are saying it might be a very good deck. So I look to see it represented, but end of the day, I think that if I had to pick one black-green variant that'll probably make the top 8 here, it's very likely going to be a Delirium deck. Delirium's been posting some results, and it's especially decent against Mardu decks. You know, a lot of these decks will now play like 3 copies of Ishkana in the main deck because Ishkana is so boss against Mardu. You know, shuts down Heart of Kirin and blocks on the ground against the Gideons and all the other small stuff that they'll gum up the ground with. So just Ishkana is a massively good card against Mardu right now, which is sort of the baddest deck in the format. And you get to play Traverse the Ulvenwald, which is a really, really strong card at nearly any point of the game. Just these black-green Delirium decks are looking pretty decent, and they've got even more answers than that. A lot of them played Mind Rack Demon at a 2 or 3 of. That's really good against Heart of Kirin too. So just I think that black-green Delirium has a chance here, but I'm not going to give it 2 or 3 slots or anything. And to round things out here, I think that there will at least possibly, this one I'm not 100% sure about, but I would really like to and have some faith that there might be, let me say that, a mono black zombies deck in this top 8. I could say some of the same things that I said about Marvel decks, about the Mono Black Zombies deck. It is a fringe-looking deck, but it has posted at least halfway decent results so far in the pre-Pro Tour season, and just like Marvel decks, enough good players, enough high-level players are taking this deck seriously enough that it's time to start looking at it like it might be real. But unlike Marvel, as a matter of fact, the opposite of Marvel, one of its best matchups is the control decks. You know, we play against blue-red control, and yeah, they've got Magma Spray, a card that hurts us, but we've got plenty of things that come back from the graveyard, like a lot of things that come back from the graveyard. So we can just drive blue-red control decks absolutely bonkers. And we've got a fair amount of staying power against the mid-range decks of the format, like Mardu, Black-Green Delirium, you know. Just the only things we really have to worry about for the most part, are, you know, combo decks. We don't like Aetherworks Marvel very much, and we really don't like that New Perspectives deck either, which is not necessarily going to make the top 8 or anything, but that deck will crush us because we will give it the time to do so. But even so, that's just having bad game against fringe decks. We don't care that much about that, you know? We can sort of let our win percentages suffer against decks we don't think we're going to see very often, but we are going to see Mardu decks, we are going to see blue-red control decks, we are going to see black-green decks, and Zombies has at least 50-50 game against almost all of those, and against control, its game gets a little bit better. Now, there's also a mono black deck that's not quite zombie focused. It plays a couple of zombies, but it also plays like Bone Picker and Walking Ballista and stuff, and I think that Zombies is probably better than that deck, but I at least wanted to point that deck out. You know, it's top 8'd a couple of times, but not as consistently as something like Mono Black Zombies. This deck looks really, really strong, extremely resilient, plays decent removal, you know, very focused, consistent deck as well. So I think that it has a lot going for it. It's got a lot of cool tricks that it can play, and it's got like fairly good longevity. So I think that it definitely has a chance, but whether or not it'll make the top 8 is a whole other thing. You know, it might be like Blue Black Zombies from a couple of Pro Tours ago, you know, did really well day 1, but didn't quite make the day 2 cut. So I think that this deck might be very, very close to that deck as far as its story ultimately, but I still think that there's definitely something to it, and for the record, I like it more than the Blue Black Zombies deck from a couple of seasons ago. And that's my top 8 right there. Who knows if that's correct or not? I hope it'll be close. Who knows, you know, though? I mean, once Pro Tours happen, we are putting these cards into the hands of the best players in the world. So, and people that play Magic for 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight trying to get their deck exactly right. You know, it's the most tuned lists you'll ever see. These are people that play Magic for a living and are very serious about it. So with that in mind, you never know if someone is just going to come out, or multiple teams even, are going to come out with decks that just blow the existing meta away. It's happened before, it could happen again, and there are some teams that are being a little secretive, at least at the time of this recording, about what they're playing. So who knows? You know, pros might have a whole other way to approach this meta than what we've seen so far. And there are some dark horse decks. You know, I've mentioned the red-white aggro deck. That's mostly a mono-white aggro deck. And I just don't think, though, that that deck is serious enough. Honestly, I think it's very good at FNMs, and I think that it did pretty well at the beginning of the format because fast aggro tends to do pretty well at the beginning of formats. But at this point, I don't think that it's good enough. You know, I just think it's a little gimmicky and a little too cheeky. Let me just say that. It just plays a bunch of 1 and 2 ups, or 1 and 2 drops. And I think that it's probably been figured out at this point. So I'm not sure about basically the white aggro deck. New Perspectives. I dropped that name. This is another deck that a lot of people are taking very seriously. Even like Luis Scott Vargas, one of the top 5 things he wants to see at the Pro Tour is somebody go off on camera with New Perspectives, which means that not only he, but a bunch of other pros are taking this deck seriously, something we didn't know would happen necessarily. You know, if you go on Spikes and look at the threads for this deck, there's a bunch of people that are like, this deck is terrible, and it's not good, and it's never going to be good, and it's stupid. But, you know, there are a lot of pros that at least have some amount of faith in the New Perspectives deck, and it just completely chews apart mid-range strategies. If a deck's going to kill you past turn 5, New Perspectives can win before then. If it drops New Perspectives on turn 5 or 6, then things are going to get crazy, and the deck can consistently kill you on those turns as long as it gets its New Perspectives on those turns. So You know, as long as it's not playing against control, or it can do a lot. New Perspectives looks like a fairly solid deck, and I just put out my New Perspectives deck. I've gotten in some reps with it. I can tell you that this is a real deck, you guys. I really think that it is. So I do think that it could at least make a splash. I don't think it'll get past day one necessarily, but I do think that it'll have some representation. Hopefully it'll be on camera, and I think that it has a chance. It has a chance because it can beat Mardu. A little tough to beat Mardu because Mardu can still get a fast start and kill you before you can drop your Perspectives. But against most mid-range decks in the format, Perspectives is ridiculous. But at the end of the day, I don't think that it's top 8 material, necessarily. I hope it is. I want it to be. It's my favorite deck in the format right now. Seriously, bottom line, favorite deck in the format, but objectively, I don't think it's top 8 material. And if I had to talk about, like, I guess one other deck, it would probably be the red-black aggro deck. I'm pretty sure that a lot of Team Channel Fireball is on this deck from some of the stuff that I've read, at least so far, you know. And I'm not really sure about it. You know, there's a couple of different ways to build this deck, but there is sort of a consensus list that's been going around the last couple of weeks here. I don't know that red-black aggro is better than Mardu. It's faster a little bit, maybe, than Mardu. Empties its hand, plays its Hazoret, you know, all that. Just a fast deck, yes, but I don't quite know if it's consistent enough or has the staying power to beat these really good mid-range decks that if it gets a slow start against or if it gets just disrupted against, it's probably going to go down. So I'm not really sure about red-black aggro, but it is probably the last deck I want to give a nod here to. Let me know down there in the comments what decks you feel like are going to be doing well this weekend, if I missed anything, or maybe I've over or under evaluated a deck here. Let me know. Really interested in getting a discussion here. So like the content if you like the content. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. You can hit the bell for the notifications, subscribe, do all the stuff. YouTube pitch, you know how it is. And I'll see you cats later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.